We're excited to have you both here.
How are you? Hi. How are you doing?
Hi.
What's your name, Michelle?
Good evening.
Michelle, how you doing? I think I see you sometimes on channel,
City College.
Oh, did you? Which one? Yeah,
28th Street, Kirk. We're 2800 block of Kirk.
Okay, this is,
That's
we
the
got
water
here,
main
we
that
got here.
turned off City College.
Okay, so
What if,
Doesn't know that I helped.
no John Wills tonight?
well,
They
Eric
say it
Holcomb
might rain,
told me.
everybody
I
chicken.
guess the letters went out for next
You ready?
Tuesday. Yeah.
Okay, is it on?
Oh my gosh,
Okay.
what a
Councilman Clark, I'm ready. Greetings, good evening, colleagues and audience members. My name is Ed Reisinger. I am the chairman of the Land Use and Transportation Committee for the City Council. I welcome you to the City Council chambers. We are here this evening to conduct our 24th work session on City Council Bill 12-0152, which is transform Baltimore zoning. During our 23rd work session held on Wednesday, February the 18th, we worked on Title 17, which was signs on page 280 through 313. Today we will continue our review of Title 18, which is nonconformities, starting on line 1 of page 314, that's page 314, and work on as much as we can during today's session in 2 hours. The Land Use and Transportation Committee intends to work progressively through the bills by reviewing it page by page, starting with Title I and continuing through the bill in the order it is written. City agencies and the public will be asked to participate by raising their questions or comments as the committee is discussing the page. They have a comment or question regarding that page. I encourage everyone to visit the City Council's website, which is www.baltimorecity.council.com, to stay updated with the section of the bill that the Land Use and Transportation Committee is working on at each work session. If you're unable to attend the scheduled work session and you wish to provide written comments or amendments, please mail it to the Office of Council Service. Attention to Jennifer Coates at 100 North Holiday Street, Baltimore, Maryland, 21202, or email Jennifer at jennifer.coates@baltimorecity.gov. One of my one and only ground rule that I have is, could you please turn off your cell phones, Android, smartphones, to give courtesy and respect to those who are going to testify at today's work session. We have, with council people, my colleagues, to my second to my left is Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark.
Chairman.
Sitting next to me is Councilwoman Sharon Green Middleton.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Paul Plymouth, who's representing the President of City Council, Bernard Jack Young. Anyone who wishes to, this is a work session, it's not a hearing. So when I'm going page by page, if you have a question or an amendment, or you need clarity on the page or the subtitle, you can get up and ask that question if you want clarity or if you have an amendment. But this is not a public hearing, it's a work session. So, okay. So we will start Title 18, Nonconformity, Subtitle 1, Purpose of Title. We will start on page 314, and we will start with line 3, 18-101, Purpose. So does anyone have any amendments or questions on page 314?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes. Go ahead.
Just for the record,
You want to acknowledge who you are?
Laurie Feinberg, Planning Department, and just for the record, since there's some new people to these hearings, I'm not reading in the agency comments as the committee has already received those, but if there are questions on the sort of the joint agency package that went over, I can try to answer those.
So, Ms. Floyd, you have a question or you have a question or amendment on page 314?
I think this is the nature of a question. When I look at the lines 17 through 27, and we have 3 definitions there, and I'm looking at non-conforming lot, I'm wondering, I think is this a new category for us? I'm not sure. I don't remember right now. But isn't a lot usually defined in terms of its size in relation to the use that someone wants to make of it? So how does that sort of how does that relate to nonconformance? I'm not sure. I'd like a little bit more of an explanation because...
Okay. It's a good question. Ms. Feinberg?
It's not a new term, okay. And it really relates to again, to the size. I think the language is clear that each use in the district has a minimum size associated to it, and we have situations, very rare, but there are a few oddball pieces of land where they would be smaller than the minimum for something in that district, and that is the definition of a non-conforming lot.
I'll follow up with that so that I can get some additional clarity. So if we have a use that is occupying a lot that no longer has the required minimum lot area, okay, that use is apparently not non-conforming. It's the lot that's non-conforming and not the use. Is that right?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, if I look at lines 24 through 27, I see non-conforming use defined as something that doesn't conform to the applicable use regulations, but nothing related to bulk regulations in that definition.
Right. So that's the 2 separate things. If the lot is, if the use may be permitted, a residential lot in R8, the minimum is 750 square feet. The use is permitted regardless, but if the lot is smaller than 750 square feet, then it's a non-conforming lot.
Okay. If you have, Councilwoman Clark, you got a question?
Yeah, this is, I want to get into this lot question later, but let me just say now that we found ourselves in my district dealing with, we're always dealing with side yards in Hamden. And we also dealt with a back lot in Hamden. I say Hamden because that seems to be the place where every developer wants to develop everything to the nth degree. And we were before the zoning board on a lot that was subdivided unbeknownst to the owner of the property, by deed, but not by public record, or not by public action. And it was much smaller than would accommodate a house without all kinds of variances. But we were before the zoning board because we had to argue against those variances. Now, we never had to yet because the owner or the contract owner of that back lot saw how many people were there and just said he would see you later, alligator, that he was going to leave now, and actually so far he hasn't come back. But further on there's a place where non-conforming lots can, I forget what it is, but when we get to it I'll mention it, but this is an issue that what Ms. Floyd is saying is that until you know what use you want to apply to that lot, you don't know whether you have a non-conforming or not. And that's, I think, gets at the root of what her issue is. A lot's a lot's a lot, but until you call it, do something with it, it doesn't how is it non-conforming per se? I know this is in the original code. I know it's just picked up language from the 71 code, but as we go further along in these definitions, it creates a problem I'd like to eliminate, and I'll talk more about it when we get to it, because I can't remember where it is in this chapter.
Well, the lot requirements typically do go with the district, not the use. So, but yes, it is a little bit further along, so we should hold that for
I mean,
that
it
time.
states here requirements of the district, so, okay.
Right.
All right.
And the actual dimensions are in the tables.
And Ms. Floyd, if you're still not clear or have the answer to your question, after the work session, you can talk to Ms. Feinberg. Anyone else on page 314? No? Okay. Now on page 315. Any amendments discussion on page 315?
I have one question.
Yes, go ahead.
I just wanted to know what the word illegal means. At the top of page 315, I don't have an amendment. Top of page 315, line 2. A use or structure that was illegal as of the effective date of this code remains illegal if it does not conform with each and every requirement of this code. I'm just questioning the word illegal because is that what you mean? I mean, or is it non-conforming, or what do we mean? And I think it's in the code now. I don't understand there either.
Let Walter answer that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Non-conforming use.
You got to use, she's, the law department, are you answering this question, the law department, or?
Two people from law today, so.
She can take this. Okay, sorry. Minda Goldberg with law. Non-conforming use is a legal use. If it's not even a non-conforming use and it's not a conforming use, then it is an illegal use. Non-conforming is a legal use, not illegal.
Right, that's why I was questioning. So what's can you give me an example of an illegal use?
I think I can clarify it.
Okay, you want to, okay.
And this
David,
is,
you want to introduce, acknowledge
my name is
yourself?
David Tanner. I'm the Executive Director of the Board of Municipal and Zoning Appeals. I think this is in the code, and it was in the previous code to cover uses that were not authorized by permits, uses that have evolved into illegal use, but they've never had a permit to reflect that use. If they can't just claim it to be a legal use when the new code is adopted, because there's no history of an authorized legal use at the property.
I see.
So you can't have a multiple family dwelling in a single family district and get credit for that if there's no
Have it
record.
grandfathered in.
Right.
Okay,
Okay, that helps me. Thank you.
okay, all right. Thank you. Anyone else on page 315?
Yeah, I do have one more question. It's in the old code, but I do have a question.
Give us the
Lines 315, lines 12 to 14, nonconformity with off-street parking requirements. This is just picked up from the current code, but it says, no use may be construed as nonconforming solely by reason of nonconformance with the off-street parking requirements of this code. Does that mean what it says? Just that
I think so.
if you don't have the proper amount of off-street parking, you can still be a conforming use, but it doesn't matter about the parking.
Okay.
There are hundreds of conforming uses that don't comply to the required parking requirements because they existed prior to 1971 or even before that. And the fact that you don't comply with the required off-street parking is not enough to prevent the use from continuing. It's still considered to be a permitted use. It's non-complying as to the parking only if you try to change the use to a new use that the requirements exceed the existing use. Then the parking is a crucial issue
So
for.
if you are moving into a new use, I don't know, you had a bakery, that's non-conforming, no off-street parking.
And you want a restaurant which has a much more restrictive parking requirement, you have to come up with the difference.
So you have to do something about the requirement to comply
Yeah,
with what the restaurant should have in off-street parking.
yes,
It's not, you don't grandfather non-conformance from one use to another.
that's correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
Ms. Floyd?
Thanks.
Yes, and on page 315, when we're in the section regarding determination of nonconformity, 15 through 31, I had a question, which was whether at any time in this process, whether it has been the idea has come up of creating a nonconforming use registry, which is something that's done in other jurisdictions. And if it hasn't been thought of, you know, I would suggest that it might be something that council might want to consider, because the idea of it would be to lessen the uncertainty, this whole issue of how you know, what has to be brought forward and who knows and who doesn't know. And if there's a registry, and it's a public registry, then people can check it, people can get on it, other people can know what's there. And so this is done in other jurisdictions.
Okay. All right, thank you. Anyone else on page 315? Mr. Tanner, you
Well, I was just gonna
want to respond to Ms. Floyd?
respond. I think it's a good idea, but I think we need a more inclusive land use registry so that we can easily determine what the authorized use of the property is, either non-conforming or permitted or whatever. I think we're behind in that regard. We currently have land use codes that we use to establish uses, but they need to be updated and they need to be maintained. And I think it's a good idea not only just for the non-conforming uses, but for all uses.
Okay, so since you brought that up, so what agency or whom should be responsible for all that data?
That's the problem. That's why it's not done, because no one does it.
Okay, so we got to find some agency to do that. It's a good point.
The use codes are recorded now in the housing department with permits, and I think in recent years, recent things we have better records on because the computers, I mean, we're talking about, you know, everything used to be on index cards. And so I think we're moving forward. The problem for zoning purposes or for determining nonconformity is you can go back to whenever, you know, if something hasn't changed, you know, whether it was that's why you're digging up through the index cards or whatever it is. So it's a very practical difficulty, both from the administration side as well as the applicant right now to make those proofs. And so in some times it's just a matter of digging through lots of records. Okay. So it's a very labor-intensive process.
So with today's technology, we should be
moving forward. We're doing better. It's just that when you go backward, I think, is the problem.
We should do better than that.
Yeah. Well, that's why we're here. Ms. Floyd?
Yeah, I want to clarify this. I'm not talking about a matter of technology or just computer record keeping. What I'm talking about is something which would have to be written into the code, which would require affirmative action on the part of the property owner to, by a certain period of time, to actually register, get the property properly registered, certified as being a legal non-conforming use, which would then be something that could be tracked as to whether it's has been abandoned or not, but these are things that don't exist now, but it would have to be something that would be written into the code. I'm not talking about a database. I'm talking about an actual requirement that goes along with this determination section.
Okay. Got it. That's duly noted. Okay, thank you, Ms. Floyd. Anyone else on page 315?
15 or 16?
15. Okay. We are now on page 316. Any amendments or discussion on page 316?
Oh, I do have I do have an issue with 18-305, and that's from lines 24 to 36, and a couple lines on the next page. I believe, Mr. Chairman, members, this is a departure from current code, I believe, although I may be wrong. And basically, what it says is that if, okay, you have a, let's say you have a structure that has a non-conforming use. Let's say that structure is damaged or it has a fire. Then you have to, it says that you have to obtain a building permit for repair or reconstruction within 1 year of the date of the damage or destruction. Now, right now, I believe that damaged or buildings needing repair, they just go under the general rule of abandonment and loss of the non-conforming use. What this does, or I believe it does, is it gives a extra benefit or longer time period to something that is where a use is being abandoned because the building's been damaged or fire damaged or somehow destroyed. It does say you have to get a building permit within a year after the event of destruction, which I think is reasonable, and I think that's what it is now. I would just like to suggest that two things, that it must also be completed within 1 year of the date of the issuance of that permit. In other words, that there is a time limit set for the completion of the work.
I believe that's on line 36, 35 and 36. If I'm not sure if that gets to what you're asking.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, so the other thing, good, that's right. I forgot about that. And then next, on line 33, it says, the Board of Municipal and Zoning Appeals may grant an extension of this period. The amendment that I would like to suggest is that they may grant an extension of the permit for a maximum of 1 year at a public hearing appeal. So basically, that they can't just grant, somebody in an office can't just grant, you already have a year to get your permit, you already have a year to execute your construction work. Now, there's sort of this open statement that the zoning board can extend this period, which is a year and a year. I would like it to say that it can extend the permit only, and by a maximum of 1 year, and that they would have to, the board would have to do that at a public hearing, appeal hearing.
So it's going to be Councilwoman Mary Pat Clark's amendment to this, right? That's what you're going to do?
It
Okay.
is. I didn't, for once in my life, write it all down, but I'll be glad to. Stephanie, if you'll remind me of that one. It's on line 33.
Mr. Chair?
I just want to add a question to that came to my mind with with buildings or in an area that is designated historical designation, how would CHAPS, would they play a role in this?
In a historic,
As far as I mean, because none of that is mentioned in the.
You wanna respond to that?
Well, throughout the code, I mean, there's general language at the beginning that if there's other relevant laws, you have to follow them. So that's already covered in the most broad sense. This section, of course, is about the use. There's another section about nonconforming structures, because again, you can be nonconforming in the two ways. Just to note, because I heard David's testimony before, after a lot of back and forth, in this code, we simplified the language. We got rid of the terminology non-complying and define them all as non-conforming use, structure, lot, and signs, just as a note. But this section is just referring to the non-conforming use. There's another one with a structure. If you're in a historic district, you're always subject to that review, and that may be obviously grounds for extension if you're trying to do the right thing, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Mr. Chair. Just to follow up on Councilwoman Clark, putting in another review is fine, but the law is going to have to give some criteria to when a permit would be denied if you go beyond that year. So when you're writing your amendment, think about what criteria, because you wouldn't want to leave it open totally to the hearing officer's discretion about who gets an extension on their year to build and who doesn't, because that would just open it up to sort of a legal challenge right on its face before it was ever applied. So you'd want some standards about, if you go over the year, what is this hearing person going to look for as, you were, a week from being done and you just need that extra time, or, think about whatever it is the criteria is that you have in your mind for that extension and write that into the amendment.
can I say something? I appreciate your comment, and I think you're perfectly correct, but right now in this code, as I know it, which is obviously not perfectly, you have a law that disregards conditions in general about the abandonment of non-conforming uses. And it's repeated in this, here it is, it's coming up on the next page in 18-308. And basically, regardless of any reservation of an intent to resume active operations or otherwise not abandon the use, and in other words,
right,
it doesn't matter what you say, you abandon for this amount of time, whether you meant to, whether you were rehabbing, whether it was a fire that wouldn't go out, you're done for with retrieving your non-conforming use. And actually, I would really like to see 18-305 totally deleted and put back under 18-308, where I think it is now, so that there's no, but that's one of the problems that's created, is that it's a whole can of worms. And let me just say that my experience is 3400 Roland Avenue. Da-da-dum-dum-dum-dum-dum. Their permit expired, but they filed in advance of that to extend it and make some changes or some such thing. Then another year goes by. Well, anyway, to make a long story short, we don't know where it is, and when they start building it, we now see that this apartment complex on 3400 Roland Avenue looks nothing like the drawings submitted at the time the permit was pulled. And it is explained to us that all kinds of engineering inner stuff happened in the city to turn it into what looks like a fort during the Second World War along the coast of Ocean City.
Okay.
And so, all right, not to go, sorry, it's already too late. But I would really like to see this 18305 eliminated and just tucked into where it is now, which is 18308.
Right, I mean, that certainly would be a legal option, and then it's like, you know, if by an act of God your building falls over, then all of a sudden, you know, and you used to be non-conforming, then that's your bad luck, and,
It is.
you know, but I think it's just a question of, you know, once you give them the right to ask for an extension, you know, the law is going to look to make sure, or you could possibly be subject to a challenge if you don't sort of say what the criteria is in some vague sense for an extension, you know.
Which, I think you're absolutely correct. It just creates a can of worms. I'd rather have them back in the category where that's it, it's over.
Okay. Right, well, you put the amendment in, huh?
Okay.
Yeah.
I've been putting amendments in for a million years. I'll bring this in next week.
Okay. Anyone else on page 316? Okay, now we are on page 317. Any amendments to discussion on page 317?
I already did.
Okay. Now we are on page 318.
I have a question,
Yes,
not
go
an
ahead.
amendment.
Go ahead.
All of a sudden, we're talking generically, and then all of a sudden, we're talking about junk or scrap storage and yards, vehicle dismantling, etc.
I can explain that
That's
if
on
you'd like.
page 14, line 14.
It is, it's on line 14 on page 318.
Would you like an explanation?
Yeah, how did this
Okay.
get in
There's
here?
a very specific reason for that. This code flat out prohibits any new junk or scrap storage yards in the city, period, junkyards or storage yards. Therefore, we wrote special section and provisions because there are, I think it's about 6 or 8 existing businesses in the city.
I see.
Because the use technically no longer exists once this passes, they're different than other non-conforming uses because we're saying it completely goes away. So we were a little more flexible on the non-conforming standards for those uses. And there was actually an amendment from the Planning Commission to apply the same flexibility to incinerators, which are also prohibited in the new code. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you're giving them, you're doing like a Hillary thing where you're giving them conditions under which they can do things?
Yes, there's very specific but limited ability to modify existing non-conforming structures because there is zero ability in Baltimore City to open a new incinerator or a new junkyard based on this code.
Junkyards. Are you doing the same with incinerators?
Yeah, the amendment from the Planning Commission, our Amendment 18.2, does the same for incinerators.
So they are permitted to expand by 25% on the same or adjacent lot.
Right.
So there doesn't have to be a review, like by the zoning board? They are junkyards.
As drafted, I don't think that would be subject.
It says
They would
allow.
be existing non-conform. They would still have to go to the board as a non-conforming use. These are just the limits to what can be done there under non-conformity, but it would still be reviewed by the board because it is a change to a non-conforming use.
It is a non-conforming, it's the king of all non-conforming uses.
Yes, so nothing here changes the requirement that the board hear that. These are just the framework, like Hillary is saying, the ability is a little bit more specifically stated as to what they can modify.
Because they're not in the tables, because they're not.
Because they no longer
don't
exist as a
exist.
use, right.
So they can't be listed there as conditional
Exactly.
by zoning board approval, but somehow,
So in Title 18, which is the non-conforming title, that's the only place that they're reflected, and these would be the framework or the limits for non-conforming. And I got to tell you, through public testimony, this was kind of a hot area, and this was language that came to through compromise. I mean, there are some, existing businesses that this impacts. What? Yeah,
So-
in Councilman Reisinger's district, many of them. So this was a result of working with the property owners, recognizing that these are not particularly desirable uses, but are a necessary evil in some cases.
no, I'm just, I don't want to beat a dead horse or whatever.
The board,
Dave, you want to respond to that?
the board, the way I read the board's authority, they don't have the authority to expand any non-conforming use.
That's why this is written as the exception. That's why it's here.
What?
The board, I think that needs to be clarified.
I would appreciate it.
Well, we were directed to call it out here in the nonconformity section to establish that ability, as opposed to if we were silent on it, it would default to the general rules of not able to expand nonconforming uses, which is title, it's the exception to 303, 18303, which says the board, you can't expand, and this is where you can.
The way I believe this could be interpreted is they could expand 25% by right without coming to the board.
Well, I mean, I'm not,
I think that's handled by Title II, is a change to nonconformity.
We are, Hillary, before
Mr.
you start, we're
Yeah,
joined
sure.
by Councilman Bill Henry to my left. Hillary, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, we have to remember that in order to effectuate all the different sections in this code, they have to be read together. So there's nothing in here that would say you don't have to go to the BMZA or this is of right, but if that's confusing to people, obviously it could be amended to be more clear that, this is what you're allowed to do for these junk, scrap, and I guess planning wants to add incinerators to that area. You're allowed to expand these up to 25%. It doesn't say, and you don't have to go to the board. So, I mean, just from a statutory construction part, just because one section says something doesn't mean all the other sections are ignored. They're all read together.
But
you
if
have
the
a lawyer.
if it says the board cannot grant an extension of a non-conforming use,
Right, and to read that in conjunction with
Already.
right, to read that in conjunction with 18311 would be to effectuate both of them. So, under the rules of statutory construction, 18311 would then become the exception to the general rules stated. There's no way, this then has absolutely no meaning if it's read that way. So it's obviously an exception, but if it's confusing, that language could be put there.
Yeah, well,
That's
let's
all
do
I'm
that.
saying.
Yeah, we'll do that.
I think
That
if
way
you,
there's no-
you can simply add to 18303
Okay.
other than as stated in 18311.
That sounds good. Paul, you got that? Okay.
That's important.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do that. So, Councilman Henry?
First of all, Mr. Chair, let me apologize for being late, and I apologize again if what I'm asking is something that has been covered and I missed it. But if it's something that was just covered and I didn't understand it, I need a clarification. Which is my understanding is that under current law, in the case of a non-conforming use, if it has been discontinued for more than 12 months, the board currently has the power to extend that for an additional 12 months. Is that being removed?
No.
Okay, because I don't see that here. Where would that power be?
That's not, that doesn't apply to expansions of existing.
Oh, I went back and I was looking at 18308, discontinuance or abandonment, and I would have thought it would be there.
We just did that.
Right.
I think the part that you would be referring to, Councilman, would be 18308, discontinuance or abandonment.
Right.
The bottom of 317.
And reading that, where does it say that the board has the ability to extend that legitimately for an additional 12 months?
It does not.
Does it currently? Because I was just at a BMZA hearing where they said as much, and it seemed like I remembered that.
This is the current.
That's the current code. Okay, so that's being removed.
I'm not as familiar with what the current code said, but the proposal that we came up with after, again, lots of public discussion is to make it clear, pick a number, and stick with it. And that's the proposal, is 12 months.
That's a big deal.
Okay, well, see, now, in the current law, it says has been discontinued for 18 consecutive months. And it says, in accordance with subtitle 7 of this, the board may extend the time limit for discontinuance for one or more additional periods. In no case, however, may the total of the additional time exceed 18 months.
One of the complaints we heard in the drafting in the public meetings is the existing section of the code on nonconformity is very unclear. You have 3 different types, and it's very difficult to understand which type something falls in. We attempted in this draft to make it clearer and cleaner.
Okay.
So we didn't have a type
All
1,
12
type
months,
2,
yeah.
and type 3.
And so let me, I'm sorry, I should have prefaced this. I'm not complaining. if the new code is going to say that the BMCA does not have the ability to extend for an additional period, I'm not arguing that. I just want to know if that's the case or not. I mean, I'm comfortable with that. I'm also comfortable having a conversation if others aren't happy with that. I just want to know if it's happening or not.
That, as written, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I believe that'll be challenged immediately.
You may have that as an extra
Oh,
copy.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Tanner, you want to say something or turn it over to?
Well, I'm just saying, if you have a rigid 1 year without any possibility of an extension, there's going to be a lot of property owners that are not going to be happy when it takes them a year to get their insurance and then go to reestablish the use and find out that they're out of time. They're going to be coming back to the council and asking for an amendment to the code.
Okay. Councilwoman Clark, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to agree with Mr. Tanner. We have a sort of a dichotomy going on. We've got all kinds of things that would let residentially zoned properties become commercial, on one hand. So let's liven the city up. Let's go and have different ways of turning residential properties into little corner stores. On the other hand, you've got little corner stores, most of which in my district are not desirable to have. But when you have a non-conforming use in a property, at least the tradition has been that if you continuously use it, you go to the zoning and then it's been abandoned, that you have a shot at going to the zoning board to extend it or to change that use to another non-conforming, usually commercial use. Like you can change I don't know, a barber shop to a grocery store. But you have to go to the zoning board to do that. And if you've lost that right after 1 year, in most of my neighborhoods, that would be a good thing. But how can a code that does that also then turn around and want residential properties to become neighborhood commercial and stuff like that without, kind of in a random way, and closing the door on continuity of, or at least a shot to keep little commercial parts of residential buildings in operation?
I think, Councilwoman, you just explained why we have the neighborhood commercial tool. We tried to create a little bit more predictability based on the architecture of the building, so that if there was a intention of a retail, it would go back to the board and you would establish your commercial use. If it was a non-conforming use in a building that was never intended for commercial, like your example in a residential zone, they would, and they abandoned it for 12 months, they would not have the ability to apply. Again, this was the result of a lot of public meetings, discussions, and back and forth. We heard loud and clear all over the city that we want the ability to fill corner stores, but make them conditional to the board, not have this total abandonment and the confusion that you have now with it's R8, but and I believe that was changed in the code, but you can now go to the board and ask for B1 uses. So it's taking some of that language and putting it what we believe to be more clearly in the neighborhood commercial uses. I think and I neglected to put this amendment, state it verbally, but on the 1 year issue for a fire, the Planning Commission did recommend changing that to 2 years in the case of destruction. Treating destruction, in other words, the Planning Commission in their amendments wanted to be able to treat fire, damage, flood differently than abandonment. Abandonment means, you move out and you shut the door, but they wanted to be more lenient on the person that suffers the flood or the fire. And so their recommendation was 2 year and not 1 year on those circumstances, which would apply to 18305 and then the parallel 18405 on the structures.
Okay, Councilman Henry, then Councilwoman Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I apologize for being late, but I will say, fortunately, though, it appears that I'm here in time to make my regularly scheduled pitch for how conditional by ordinance could be helpful to us in a situation like this, where, for instance, it might be good. I mean, it's good to have in the code a set period of time during which the board can address a restoration of use after it's been discontinued, and whether that's 12 months or 18 months, we can talk about what a good firm number is for what the board can allow. But I've been aware of instances where it would have been helpful if you could go back and take something that used to be a corner store years ago and had been abandoned for years, and now there's a desire to have it be a corner store again or some type of commercial entity, but under the code, the zoning board did not have the authority to go back and make a change after such a long period of disuse. Perhaps the way we deal with somebody who, for a variety of special circumstances, be it fire, be it just difficulty with getting all the paperwork, for whatever reason, if they exceed whatever the mandatory 12, 15, 18-month period that we give the board authority for, then we simply say that if you've exceeded that, you can do a ordinance to restore a commercial use to the building, and just have it be a conditional by ordinance process if the commercial use has been abandoned for more than that amount of time.
That's our neighborhood commercial is essentially that, and instead of moving it from conditional to the board, you'd make neighborhood commercial conditional by ordinance. That would do the same thing.
Okay, oh, well,
Well, that would be the least that we should do.
It will be taped.
yeah. So I guess what I was thinking of is if that was in the code under non-conforming structures, it would allow for that to happen even if the map does not call that area neighborhood commercial.
I think you would.
It gives the neighborhood and the council person flexibility to work with the property owner.
I would suggest that you just do that by cross-reference, not put it there. I think based on what I've heard from this committee, there's clear consensus on adding back in the ability to have conditional uses by ordinance. And my understanding is as soon as we complete Title 19, we're going to do the tables, and that's where you would call out which falls under which column.
Okay.
You could, I mean,
But I don't think you would want it.
Put an amendment and change it, then you put a Bill Henry.
Right.
Henry amendment.
All the uses are illustrated in the tables as opposed to here. So I think, you know, it would only be maybe an asterisk kind of cross-reference to the tables for what you're suggesting, as opposed to illustrating it in detail here.
The reason I'm making this distinction, and maybe I'm making a distinction that doesn't need to be made, and that may be what you're trying to say, is that if a property is zoned if a property is zoned R8, but it was a corner store at some point 30, 40, 50 years ago, but now it's just an empty building that used to be a corner store, and it's got an underlining zoning of R8. Under the code as it's currently drafted, can I come along at some day in the future when somebody wants to do something in that store and rezone it neighborhood commercial without worrying about spot zone?
Need to do that. As drafted, it's way easier than that. As drafted, the property owner would simply go to the neighborhood commercial is an established use in R8 as conditional. So the owner would simply go to the board and apply for that. And there's no time limit on that abandonment. It's tied to the type of building. It's
sorry.
not tied to.
You've been saying neighborhood commercial, and I've been picturing the village use of I've been picturing C1. Okay, I got you. All right. So then, yeah, I think we need to make neighborhood commercial conditional by ordinance.
Well, that's the least we should do.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else on page 316? Okay, now we are on page 317. Anyone on page 317? Any amendments, any discussion on page 317?
I thought we were on 318. What page are we on?
Okay, no, that's right,
We were just talking about scrap metal.
we were on 318?
We just did this page.
I'm sorry, I went back. We're
That was me, Mr. Chair.
319, right? Anyone on page 319? Any amendments or discussion on 319?
Mr. Chair, I have one.
Yes.
Not an amendment. 18-403. I have not looked at it since a couple days ago, so I wrote myself a note, go over this language. Here's what this says, lines 19 through 22. A non-conforming structure may not be expanded if the expansion would in any way create a new nonconformity, increase the degree of any nonconformity, or increase the bulk of the structure. So I know what the words mean. I'm not sure I understand the concepts. Like, in other words, if you have a barber shop in an R8.
This is structures, not uses.
Let Laura explain it.
The subtitle 4 only deals with the physical building, not the use in the building.
Okay, so
So if you had a building in an R8 that had a 35-foot height limit, but it existed today as 40 feet, you couldn't expand it.
Right.
It's already non-conforming in height.
Well, but it's already a non-conforming structure that we're defining here.
Right.
So
And
it is
this
by
says you
definition
can't
a
expand it.
non-conforming.
You can't expand it in the way that it's non-conforming now. You might be able to
You
expand.
can't make it 50 feet tall.
Right. You might be able to expand it in the backyard because
I'm sorry. This is what
it's,
zoning
got
boards
plenty
are
of
all
yard,
about.
but you can't go up.
Increase the degree of any nonconformity. What does that mean?
You can't go higher.
Can't go higher.
Vertical.
All right, so this is all about how high you
This
can
is
go
all
so
about
far.
the size of the building.
Or if you're projecting into the rear yard and it's non-conforming to the
Okay.
setback requirements, you can't increase the degree.
I don't know. I think that it's very vague, but so they do have the right, then a person does have the right then to expand if they don't do any of these bad things. This structure.
Not a non-conforming.
Well, then what does this mean? Like, they must, if they can't do it under 3 different circumstances, it's presumed they can do it under some. So, I'm just trying to get my hands around, this is what we
As
do.
written, no. As written, it says, you can't increase the overall bulk of the structure.
Okay, you can't increase the bulk of the structure, and presuming you can't increase the non-conforming height, you can't really do anything, can you, really?
Right. That's what I see.
No,
And
you
that's
can't.
fine with the structure. It's happy. But I just wondered whether this means anything.
I think it means a lot
All
based
right.
on the kind of building permits we see and and David's current docket.
Yeah.
Can you give me one example? Just an example.
We have 80,000 non-complying lots in the city.
Structures.
Lots that are less than 16 feet wide, things like that.
Yeah.
Lots that are only 40 feet deep. There's just a wide variety of non-complying lots. Each one of them have a non-compliant structure on them if they're developed. We did amend the code to allow for some minor changes through an administrative process, which is also included in the new code, administrative bulk adjustments, that allows the process to allow for small increases in the size of non-compliant structures to accommodate modernization and a lot of renovation, things like that. But if you want to go beyond what the administrative bulk adjustments allow, you can't.
But at the same time, we did, all that's completely true, but in addition, we eliminated the degree of non-conforming structures by eliminating the 16-foot minimum row house. In other words, in our analysis and recommendation, it's very bad form to have a code where 80% of your structures don't follow the basic rule of the code. So instead of writing a bunch of workarounds, we eliminated that minimum 16 feet for the row house, so all those, and then created stricter language for sticking to the structures. I hope that makes sense. So it's a combination. We also
You rewrote the rules to accommodate the reality.
but then said, now you got to really stick to it.
But you got to stick with this reality.
Exactly. And the other thing, there are some minor changes, again, based on those rules. The 16 feet is the reason why 80% of the city is non-conforming.
16 feet is the height,
Is the
maximum?
width
Oh,
of the
width.
property.
Oh.
We also made some minor adjustments in rear yard requirements because, again, 75–80% of the rear yards are non-conforming. So using GIS mapping, we're able to more quickly review that and made those adjustments. So coming out of the gate, we're reducing tremendously the degree of nonconformities.
Just by changing the rules.
Right.
Okay. All right, to move on, anyone else on page 319?
No, I don't think so.
19? Okay, now we are on page 320. That's 18405, restoration of damaged structures.
The same thing.
Oh, are you doing 405? I'm looking at Ms. Floyd. Are you doing 405, 406, or 411? Because I was going to do 411. 411. Okay. So here's my question about 411, 18-411 lines 22 to 34, and
That
then
line, what?
starting on line 22 of page 320 and continuing on to 321. I just want to make sure that I'm reading it properly. The way I'm reading it, to summarize, you make the application to the zoning administrator. The zoning administrator then turns it over to the planning department. The planning department does all the work reviewing it and comes up with a recommendation, and then it goes back to the zoning administrator either to be confirmed or overridden if that's the way it's going to
Right. With
play.
this section, 18411 is pretty much identical to what we're doing today.
That's my,
Yeah. Okay. That was
Exactly what Mr.
yeah.
Tanner explained.
that was the extent of my question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So you good? Okay.
yeah,
Ms.
I'll
Flo-
go after June.
Okay.
Ms. Floyd?
So on the same section, and I think I'm missing something. Someone's going to have to point me. My first question was, what is a minor expansion? That's a term, and I'm not seeing, I haven't found it, how that's defined.
That's what I wrote.
So I guess we're going to talk about that, and then I'll have another question. But that's the issue
That's right.
I put
That's
out
my
there
issue.
right now, so.
So here we are again with the issue that we have with the Planning Commission's ability to amend PUDs. And that is, what's a minor amendment? Now, actually in the current code, there's a definition of minor amendments for the Planning Commission. Little vague, but at least there's something. But here, we have no idea what a minor, who determines and what it is.
It's a minor expansion. I mean,
What
it's
does
not
that
a-
mean?
It's not a minor
And-
amendment to a PUD or anything. It's
No, no,
just
no,
saying-
I understand. Who determines that it's minor?
Let Laurie, Ms.
The zoning administrator. There is a section, and I can't remember where it is now, that speaks to the 10%, which is what's in the code today. And I'm not seeing it, but I may have to get back to you on that. But it's the same, the intention is the same as today.
Today's code says you can't project more than 2 feet additionally into the rear yard or cover an additional more than 10% of lot coverage. I don't see that in here.
I don't see anything like that.
But I think there should be some parameters that the zoning administrator needs to work with, or else you could get anything.
I know, and we don't know exactly how this is all determined, and this is exactly the kind of problem we get into with 500 angry neighbors and a befuddled bureaucracy.
That may be a drafting error, because again, the intention was this to be identical, so we would just have
You just
this
have to
reflect
define-
what's in the
You're gonna
current
have to use
code.
the microphone.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So you're saying we have to, you're going to define
Yeah, I think
it.
that was a drafting error, unless I'm remembering it incorrectly, but that the intention was to not change this whole administrative bulk adjustments section of the current code. And if we left something off, that was an error. I mean, not to confuse matters, but we did also create the minor amendments, minor
Expansion.
variances,
Variant.
which is something different. We got state authority to do that, but that's in Title IV.
Okay.
Okay, so, and I just want to also point out, we just had a discussion on page 319 of 18403, and Councilman Clark read it out, and it said, you may not, you may not. So there's not even a reference there to the fact that there on the next page is something that says, well, you may. So it seems very incomplete right now, the way it's drafted. And
Cross-reference to 403 to 411.
well, I do wish Mr. Willis was here, because he would, I think he could fill that gap by, usually there's something that says, except as provided in such and such, you can't, so this needs a lot more work, I would say. Now, can I just go ahead to my other comment, which was on the last line, no, next to the last line, line 33, well, 33 and 34. A copy of the application has been given to the owners of the adjoining properties. That seems awfully weak for a notice requirement. It seems to me that there's a much better way to just make sure that the neighbors have got something. And and that language has been given. I've not seen that anywhere else. I'm not familiar with that as any kind of requirement. It's a standard for notice. Something stronger needs to be stated there.
Well, do you have any recommendations to this language?
At this moment,
Okay, well,
I would think that something like this, well, again, I don't know what's going to come out of the additional work, but I think in any kind of situation like this, why not have a certified letter mailed to somebody?
Ms. Floyd, if you, we still have time, so if you have any.
Well, I've just made a suggestion,
Yeah.
certified mail.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Right.
That, Laurie?
Yeah.
Okay, thank
But
you.
you should probably give that to Paul.
All right, yeah, Paul,
He stepped out.
got
so
it?
Jennifer's
Okay.
got it.
anyone else on page 320? Okay, now we're on page 321. Page 321. Okay, we are now on page 322. No one on page 322. We're now on page 323.
Yes.
Councilwoman Clark?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to understand why this is here. It says 18-413, that's line 1, and it goes through line 4. Structure, it's about non-conforming structures. Structures in hospital, campus, and educational campus districts. All lawfully existing structures that, as of the effective date of this code, are located in a hospital campus zoning district or an educational campus zoning district are considered to be conforming uses. Now, usually we just change the rules to make them zoning, to make them conforming, like we just talked about. Okay, 16 feet wide, if I'm understanding it, we changed the rules so that more structures in the city fall into conforming.
Okay, the reason on this one, it's a little bit the reverse. When we, as you know, most educational and hospital campuses are currently residentially zoned. That's served to be pretty inappropriate because it really doesn't have the right use configurations. These are major institutions. They're not going anywhere, but they're not houses, and so we created special zones to reflect this. We created special bulk requirements, height limits. Many of these institutions have expanded under planned unit developments, et cetera. So in the creation of really what are the stricter rules now, in that we created height limits, for example, for the edges of the hospital zones when they're across the street from the house of 45 feet, and then you have to step back before you can do the taller building. many of those are built today to taller than that. So in working with these institutions, they requested this line to be there. So if they've got to do modernization, I'll give you the example. It's my neighborhood, your district. Union Memorial on Guilford Avenue has a building that's 6 stories, but under this code, they'd only be allowed to do 4 stories. They were worried that that building becomes non-conforming, and they'd have to go to the zoning board every time they need to do a repair or some minor work on that building that's been there for 100 years. So this basically says if it's built the day you pass this code in these 2 zones, it's okay, it's conforming. Again, this is just a building, and I made a note there. It should say conforming structures, not uses there. Because this is in the structures section.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, Councilwoman.
So that you don't need to go to a whole production to do minor work on an institution that exists and a building that exists.
If I may, Councilwoman, are you?
I'm not. No, I'm puzzled.
I got a question. Go ahead.
Because it is my district, and they built a whole new hospital attached to that 100-year-old non-conforming use, and nobody ever.
It's a PUD. That's how they did it. So in other words,
Well, that's how they'll do what they need to do then, because I'm just. What worries me is that it's not. What worries me is that I don't know all the implications down the line of doing this. I don't want to cause grief to hospitals or colleges, but I also, I don't know how you call something that's non-conforming conforming by fiat, and then there it is. It's like the Wizard of Oz. Give me a medal, I have a heart.
it's essentially a grandfathering in of what's built there, and anything new has to follow the new rules.
Well, then can we do
the
this
new rules
in other
in
places?
this case are stricter.
Well, no, can we do, so can we do this like in residential districts that have, I don't know. I just, let me think about it.
Let's stick with the campus and the education. I do have a question on this, and it's just piggybacking what she said. So, if you have a hospital that has a PUD, and like you say, I mean, right now, if there needs to be a major amendment when the structure, whether it's vertical or whatever in the area, if it's major, it's got to come into the council for an amendment.
Oh, yes,
If
this
it's minor-
does not exempt any institution from a
let me
PUD.
finish. If it's a minor change, it's got to go, the planning commission can make that, right?
Correct.
So with this right here, what I'm trying to understand, I think with this, if you have, right now we're dealing with Johns Hopkins, okay, which is an amendment. If they want to change something, if it's height or whatever, they don't need to go to the planning commission. If
Well,
it's
there's
minor.
two different buckets. If it's a PUD, nothing here supersedes the PUD.
Okay.
If it's a PUD, the PUD rules apply. This would only kick in if it wasn't a PUD. So
It's
your
not a
Johns
PUD.
Hopkins, the one that this committee just heard, for example, if that hadn't been a PUD, and they had a building that existed, the building, I'm not talking about a new one, and they wanted to do a 2-story addition to the building, and that 2-story addition sent them over the height limit of this code, they wouldn't be able to do it.
Okay, so there's some way we can write this in and be more defined, because I'm interpreting it as a,
There's no way that this supersedes any planned
fine.
unit development. That's in the PUD section, that the PUD rules apply. And there's nothing
Could a
here that,
statement be added, just a blanket statement?
again,
about
you can do a cross-reference
That's
that
what
would
I'm- yeah,
say,
okay.
subject
Okay.
to, that may create some confusion, but you know, that's no harm.
Hillary?
Anywhere there isn't a cross-reference is legally read in. I mean, looking at one of these sections in a vacuum, it's still,
They still gotta.
you still have to comply with all the rest of the code
Okay, all right.
and all the rest of the laws that exist, whether they're building or CHAP or federal.
Yeah, it's just
So,
it's
yeah.
clarity. I just, you know.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you can cross-reference, but if you happen to forget to do that, they're all still there.
Okay.
May I say one thing, Mr. Chairman? I just want to say one thing, and I'll leave it at that. This does not apply to the majority of schools, secondary and post-grad, and or I guess, I don't know, maybe it applies to all the hospitals, because it references these institutions that are within an established hospital campus or educational campus district, which has to be separately enacted through the map we have or through city council ordinance.
Correct.
So those separate campus districts function like PUDs.
Correct.
Right. So if it's a PUD or something like it, you don't need this. I don't really care, but this is a very confusing chapter or title in many respects as a working document to work with your communities with. And I just want to make sure.
Again, through the drafting, the institutions were very clear that this was important to their comfort as anchor institutions in our city, that if they weren't in a PUD and they found themselves in this situation, you know, and needed to redo the air conditioning inside a building that was taller than was allowed, that they didn't have to go to the zoning board.
That's taller than I see.
Under today's code, hospitals are conditional uses, and every time they do a structure alteration, they have to come to the board, even if they comply with the bulk regulations. So, like if they want to put in a new stairway and they're putting a 10-foot addition on, it comes to the board, and they believe that that kind of administrative or process slows them down because it takes a couple months to get through the hearing process, and they're anxious to get started, you know, on their work. So I don't know if there's a way to say structural alterations, as long as they comply to the bulk regulations, are permitted.
Mr. Tanner, may I ask? Mr. Tanner, not to beat a dead horse, because there are a lot of issues in this title that we've got to go back and make sure we got straight. But this applies to hospitals that will, for example, that will, for the first time, or will go into a PUD-like legislative, they will be like PUDs.
Districting, boundary.
District, okay.
Yeah.
They won't be hanging out there as conditional uses. That's exactly what these districts provide.
Yeah.
They will be like PUDs, but we're calling them campuses. We'll know how high the sky, where the boundaries are of the PUD, and so everything that's approved as part of that PUD, which we call a campus district, will be in compliance. I just don't understand how this is like double protecting, because they'll already be protected. And if they do not choose to become a legislative campus,
there's no choice. Excuse me. The map, and maybe I wasn't clear, they're not really a PUD. H is a district. It's not a choice. If this moves forward, a hospital, you know, Union Memorial becomes H zone. It's no longer R zoned, it's H zoned. And H zone has rules and regulations that go with it. regardless of an institution's choice to do a master plan or do a PUD or do it on top of that. They're base rules in an H zone, and that's what this is referring to.
Because the hospitals like St. Agnes and Harbor Hospital would be a good example, right?
Well, most of our hospitals have become PUDs for exactly the reason Mr. Tanner stated, because it makes them very difficult to do anything without going to the zoning board.
Right.
This would make it so they don't have to become a PUD just to do minor things every time they want to, do something else. In some ways, this is coming a little late because I think there's only about 2 hospitals that aren't already PUDs.
Yeah, I don't think St. Agnes is a PU.
Yeah,
Children's
it is.
Hospital
Most of it is, yeah.
is an example.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Page 323, subtitle 5, non-conforming signs. Page 323. Okay. Page 324.
I've got one when you get there. Oh, yeah.
Councilman Clark?
I know that my colleague has a lot to say, and I want us to have time for her to say it. Let me just say that
Where you at?
I'm on page 324, non-conforming lots,
Okay.
lines 13 through 23. Let me just say, I would recommend an amendment to delete this section in its entirety. A non-conforming lot that was established before April 1971, a single-family dwelling may be erected regardless of the minimum lot area requirements imposed by this code. No. Am I not using the microphone? Okay, I'm sorry. Ladies and gentlemen, no, no, no.
So you're going to
We'll
put
take you to Berry Street in Hamden. I will introduce you to a lady who bought a house that had a long, narrow backyard that went all the way to West 37th Street. Unbeknownst, she was swindled. She was sold the house, but by private deed, the rear yard had already been subdivided. It is too small for any reasonable house to be built on it, but we were before the zoning board fighting because of the monstrosity that was being proposed to be built in her backyard that she has maintained since 1999. That would, in this change, these little skinny side yards would be jammed full of overbuilt, no off-street parking, ugly monstrosities that I want this out of the code. Thank you.
Okay. So you'll be putting an amendment? Okay. All right. Before we get to subtitle 7, anyone else on page 324? Okay. So now we are on page 324, subtitle 7, retail good establishments with alcohol sales. And I want to thank Thomas and Michelle for your patience. So anyone have, Councilwoman?
Yes. I first also want to thank the liquor board representatives present at this work session. And I just have a few statements and then some clarity. Just to refresh memory of some of my committee, before we started these work groups, we did have some sessions out in the community, and one of the sessions was purposely held in District 6 in the Park Heights community of the Towanda Recreation Center. And I guess we all know that the Park Heights community has the most liquor establishments in the entire state of Maryland in one community. And it is also presently a community that is now governed by, a big area of it is governed by a master plan for, an urban renewal master plan for redevelopment. And it's just imperative that, you know, some things have to be done to, I guess, get rid of some of these liquor establishments that sell alcohol. It's all, just a little bit about Park Heights. Remember, it has the most health disparities. It has food deserts. It's just a very neglected area, and it also gets money from slots revenue to kind of help with the redevelopment. In order for all of that to come to fruition, there definitely has to be some changes. So we had in short, we had our community meeting there for the city. It was over 200 people that came to that meeting. And, you know, the end result is something has to be done, and we have to get rid of some of these liquor establishments. So I think, in turn, I want to thank the planning department for coming up with some ideas on working to get rid of some of these non-conforming liquor establishments. And I definitely would like some clarity on that process. We have had discussions where if they don't conform, I think within 2 years or something, they, you know, will be, you know, they have to leave, basically. I also, I don't know if I should, it's something that I should submit, because I do have 4 liquor stores with, that was given to me with approval from associations. This is at their request. But these are liquor stores that are basically conforming, or B7s. So I guess if you just want to
let me
go ahead and
introduce
talk.
the topic, and there are others here to speak. We're joined by Minda Goldberg from the Law Department, who helped draft this, and of course the Liquor Board and the Health Department. Shannon is over there. This applies to the non-conforming retail goods with alcohol sales, which is essentially a liquor store. And at the time of drafting, that was sort of the focus. We also heard loud and clear, I think, from many of your communities about what we sort of nicknamed the sham liquor stores, the BD7s operating really as a liquor store, even though they had a tavern license. So I think in the time since this code was drafted, there's new staff, and it'd probably be best for these folks to talk about what the board has been doing. I've been watching their agendas, and I know there's been a lot of focus on those particular operations.
Before you begin, I just want to mention too that after that big meeting that we had, a few months after that, I got a van with 15 people before the new staff came on, and had 3 of the liquor board people and the chair here of this committee, and some other colleagues and people from the Park Heights Renaissance. We went on the bus to actually, I took them in the community so they could see firsthand some of the illegal problems of the neglect of the areas, and it was an awakening to, in fact, this was 10 o'clock on a Friday morning, and he actually saw some things that, you know, he was just in disbelief. So again, it's just, I'm just begging for some attention in this community. So on that note.
Council members, my name is Michelle Bailey Hedgepath. I'm the Executive Secretary for the Liquor Board. The issue I think you asked about was the two different types of licensees I think that we're dealing with. The non-conforming use issue is in regards to probably our A class, which is our packaged goods sales. And then you're also asking about the tavern use, which is sometimes our BD7, which is the 7-day license, which allows ancillary package sales, but in some areas has a separate liquor package area and then a separate tavern. And I think that over the last few months, since May of 2014, we have done some checks on the BD7 establishments to make sure that they are complying with the fact that they always have to have a tavern open or bar service. And that issue is the one, so when we find that people are not in compliance with that, the board has then, either issued fines or closures in regards to those issues. So we are now verifying whether or not they are really and truly operating like taverns, because the tavern is the primary use and the accessory use is package. But I think you're right, in many of the neighborhoods, you'll have a very heavy package presence in the front, and then you're buzzed in to go into the tavern in the back. So we're just here to answer any other questions as far as in regards to what the actual license is and administratively where they are. But, and when we've read the information that you provided in regards to this council bill, but we'll be happy to answer any other questions that you have.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I took the tour. I think there's two issues here. One is the packaged goods that's non-conforming, and it was an eye-opener, and I don't want to be redundant, but some of these packaged goods stores that, especially in Park Heights in Councilwoman Middleton's district, I know that there's new players here at the liquor board and inspection, but I just have to say on the record that these establishments, even with the health regulations, they were in violation. And Councilwoman Middleton's in that Park Heights area, they have a master plan, and there are so many violations. I think you checked on some of those non-compliant liquor stores, and they were in violations, and they're still in operation. So I don't believe in throwing a blanket on everything. You know what I mean? I think some of the responsibility is basically, especially with those establishments are in compliance, that it's the health department and the liquor board whose responsibility is to go in there and make sure that they meet the regulations. But I am really concerned about what Councilwoman Middleton is dealing with in her district. I have 3 non-compliant liquor stores, and what we're going to do is we're going to rezone those because they're not a problem in our community compared to Councilwoman Middleton. I support the planning department in regards to these liquor package goods, whether they Class A, and someone, I don't want to mention their name, but with the liquor board made a statement like, well, this business has been here for 35 years. Well, that don't mean because they've been there for 35 years you leave them stay open, you know what I mean? And they're in violations. So I really, if you can, I just want to know what the liquor board's opinion, if you can at this time, on the planning department's recommendation to terminate after 2 years. And I think I think they can ask for an extension. Do you have an opinion on the planning department's?
At this point, the chair is told us to kind of stay neutral as far as our recommendation, but I would say that the issue, I think it really does come down to a case by case as far as where they're located, and because I don't have all of the information in regards to which ones are exactly into residential areas, I believe that the board has been more I think we've been a lot more strict in regards to problem actors, and I think so I think that some of the issues that you might have seen have been rectified, but I think that, I can't really say to really see which ones are in violation of this. It's really hard for me to kind of make an opinion too.
We also believe that the number has gone down since this was originally drafted. I think due partially to some of the liquor board and health departments, focus on these establishments. We have seen a handful just close on their own. That because they're non-conforming, they can't reopen at that location. So in some ways, even the introduction of this discussion has been effective. And we'd have to go back and maybe we can look at the numbers, but I know we started with around 108, and I think we're down in the 90s.
So you got to go back and look at those. The
well,
numbers
we have to recorrelate the records between the A licenses and the residential zoning. But we have seen some close, because I've seen zoning appeals for things that used to be liquor stores who are now doing something else.
Okay, Councilman.
Your two-year enforcement process, is that, who's going to enforce that? Is it the liquor board or housing?
As drafted, and Minda may want to elaborate on this, but as drafted, this is zoning law. So that would be a zoning enforcement. So after these times and everything would go by, if something was still existing in violation, the zoning administrator would cite them.
I think Councilman Henry, you have a question.
I had a question and possibly a statement, I suppose, to start it off with. First of all, good evening. To some extent, and I would be happy to have someone correct me if I've missed out on some of the backstory here, my understanding was that one of the reasons some of this language was being proposed, especially in regards to the taverns which are not properly behaving as they were supposed to, was because this is language that already exists in state code, but previously the liquor board had not done a great job of enforcing it.
That's the portion of the liquor density reduction that's actually in Title 14. That is the portion speaking to, and I know Councilman Reisiger remembers this, the
14,
standards.
335 and 336.
Right, the standards for taverns.
Right.
Title 18 is where we would establish the authority to amortize the liquor stores.
Right.
But the point I'm making is that when this issue had first come up here in the context of transform, and I would share with the chair, I am very supportive of the section that is essentially phasing out the Class A's in the residential neighborhoods. In the case of the taverns, there were multiple instances brought to my attention of what were essentially high-class packaged goods stores.
Correct. What we called the sham taverns, yeah.
That had been instructed previously to get BD7 licenses so that they could have some on-premise consumption because there was no other way to allow them to have tastings and, with the exception of the very occasional one-day licenses, which in the city are not offered as frequently as they are in surrounding jurisdictions. And so my question is, has any effort been made by the liquor board to maybe work with the General Assembly to create a new class of license that would allow for the concept that there might not be a 50-50 relationship between on-premise and across the board, but there would be some small amount of on-premise consumption to go along with the off-premise sales?
Councilman, that is something, when I read the issue on taverns, that was my concern in regards to those establishments. It is something that I would think that needs to be rectified, and to be for the fact that we need a different license type to address that. At this point, because we're still new, I have not submitted a legislative package because there are so many things that we could use as far as changes. So I've been really just trying to get in there, address our audit issues, and deal with that stuff. But that is the reason why many people do have BD7s and are using them as 7-day licenses and then have the opportunity, and then there are uses that you would probably want, but they are now licensed as a BD7s, and the current language in that other section would restrict those. And so there is some contradiction there because of what we have currently.
Right, and it came up in the public hearings on this, and actually we met with a couple of those wine store operators. I remember Bin 604, and there were a couple others.
Spirits in Mount Vernon,
right?
Wine Source in Hamden,
they indicated, and this was 2 years ago.
Oh, and I'm sorry, I have Grand Cru.
That they would be approaching the state delegation to try to create a new sort of hybrid license, and I don't know that that's happened, but it doesn't sound like it has. But there was sort of a coalition. It really is only a handful of businesses. Most of them, though, are conforming to the zoning. I think they all are conforming to zoning. There's, but of those sort of hybrid businesses.
Well, they conform to zoning now.
They'd be conforming. The only thing they wouldn't be conforming to in this new code would be the 50% rules, and that primarily. And we need to look at that and work together on that issue.
And then, Mr. Chair, the question that I had was, and this goes back to, let's see if I have this right. I think I may have pulled oh, here we go. Yeah, it goes back to 14.335, but I wanted to bring it up now that we're talking about non-conforming. I'm sorry, page 231, the section 14.335, so it's lines 1 through 15. Specifically, the passage that I'm curious about reads as follows: except as otherwise provided in this subsection, a retail goods establishment with alcohol sales must be located at least 300 feet from any other existing retail goods establishment with alcohol sales. My question is, does that make packaged goods stores that are legitimately zoned in commercial but are within 300 feet of each other non-conforming?
I guess that would have to be an interpretation. I'm looking to law on that. Again, the intention was, this was a three-pronged strategy for alcohol outlet density reduction. And at the time it was led by the health department. And the three prongs are the 300 feet, which really wasn't controversial in any of the public hearings, the reduction of non-conforming liquor stores, and the trying to hold taverns to the primarily. The intention on the 300 feet distance issue was that if you're there, and it would be looked at in terms of new ones. Yeah.
Yeah,
You got to use the microphone.
Yeah, I thought the intention was that a new license would not be issued if it was within 300.
I'm clear. I get that was probably the intent. My question is, does the language as written have the practical effect of making all the licenses within 300 feet of each other effectively non-conforming regardless of which one was there first, or does it require that we have to have a timeline so that the one that was there first is not non-conforming, but any later ones are?
I think that would be very difficult to enforce. It wouldn't necessarily mean they're non-conforming. They're non-complying.
Non-compliant.
As to that one provision, but they're legally established. They would be allowed to continue, but there wouldn't be new ones that would come.
The reason why I'm curious about whether that would mean that they are, and I'm happy to either take them as non-compliant or non-conforming, but I think that might be a useful policy tool for us to now have that as a separate category of retail establishments when we're trying to address them in any other fashion where we have concerns about density of liquor establishments. we could call out non-compliant retail goods establishments with alcohol sales, and that would automatically capture, as a term of art, all of these ones that are in these little dense clusters of liquor license goods. So that's kind of my question. It's not because I think that having them be non-compliant or non-conforming is intrinsically a bad thing that is going to create a problem in the code. I just want to know if it means I can call them that.
I think we'd have to further study that. I see Hillary. I think we're putting her on the spot a little bit. But we could also...
I didn't go to law school. It's so much easier to just come up with the questions and let people who've studied answer them. So
I think the other thing is, as written, we exempted downtown and one of the commercial areas. So this is really intended for the sort of the Main Street corridors, because it wouldn't impact residential areas.
It doesn't apply to C5 or C1E. Which is C1E?
C1E is the entertainment commercial. It's essentially Fells Point. And
because C1E is so much easier to say than Fells Point.
So I think what we'd also like to do is go back from a mapping and see really how many we're talking about that are complying and legal but are closer than 300 feet.
Okay, because I think that would be a wonderful tool for the committee.
I'm thinking even in Waverly, there's two of them, but they're more than 300 feet apart.
Right, but for example, I have in the 5400 block of York Road.
That would mean no new ones could come in, but the two there are fine.
What are the two?
You got Harry's and you got the one up at the 3400 block. There's a liquor store there. Anyway,
yeah.
I think a lot of our Main Street areas, they may have two, they may not be 300, they may be 300 feet apart. Likely the impact is no new ones come in.
I have several, I have some that have 5 in
Your
a block.
district might be an exception. Yeah.
Yeah. When I was president of the city council many years ago, I worked with Park Heights. And Bev Thomas, who called me lately and said, "Need any help?" And we went to Annapolis and we sat around and we testified, and it was our intention to make sure that BD7, which means you can operate 7 days a week, that license would depend on being a tavern, and that a tavern meant what it says. Now, I have a lot of support for a couple of establishments that find themselves with a BD7 and are not complying because nobody's ever asked them to comply in all these years. But now we are, and I just wanted to give that little bit of history because that was not something that just kind of happened. That was hard fought by the people of Park Heights, Bev Thomas leading the charge, and she's still around, and basically we won. Now, hybrids and all that, I have had no complaints to me in my district about this tavern issue. But who is going to enforce that? Is it the liquor board because it's in the state law? Or is it the zoning administrator because now we're proposing that it be in the code?
We'll both have to.
Huh?
We would both have to, because a part of our rules say that the people have to apply to the zoning. So they have to, they'd have to comply with zoning requirements. So if the new requirement for taverns would be the fact that there's 50% or whatever the space is, that's part of the liquor rules, that you have to be in compliance with whatever zoning that is under you. So that is part of the liquor code. It's part of the liquor board rules.
And what is the remedy for failure to comply in the case of taverns? I know in the case of nonconforming uses in residentially zoned, that whole gang. It's a
Right.
2-year see you later alligator, but
It would be a violation of the liquor rules, so it would probably be something in regards to 4.018, illegal conduct, but it might be, it's also the one where there's another rule in regards to following laws and rules set by the zone. There's like a blah, 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 blah rule, and that would be that rule that they would be in violation of. And then depending on the severity and nature of it, so if you were, I think the issue is that, as you said, there are several locations that have been existing and are in a certain state. And so we need to be able to address that. That's what we're doing now. We are looking at all of our locations, we're photographing, we're getting an idea of how the location is operating. And because they are a tavern, they have to act like a tavern, so they have to have bar stools, they have to have a back that's open and operating for patrons. So if someone wants to come in, have a beer, they have to be open to do that. If they don't do that, they're not in compliance. So we usually write them up on, let's say there's a rule called BD7 rule, like you're not operating in compliance with your own operation. Now, I guess if this is changed in the law, we would actually have an additional item that they would be accountable for, which would be the underlying compliance of the sales according to the zoning law. So there would be the both.
I mean, basically, what we wanted was, if you're open 7 days,
Right.
you're a tavern, act like it.
Yes. Yes, ma'am.
Now, if it turns out that the 7-day licensees aren't acting that way,
Right.
can you make them 6-day licensees?
No, we would violate them in regards to that.
So you can fine them, but can you take away the Sunday?
No, what it ultimately would be is the penalties that the liquor board has. They can at the first time, they can apply a fine and/or up to suspend or revoke. So it depends on the severity, the number of times that they do it, but we cannot change their license class. I think that's what you're asking.
That's exactly what I'm asking.
But that they do have the opportunity under another part of the law to change, they can downgrade licenses and become 6 days.
Wouldn't that be a down class?
There is that possibility, but I don't see that you would have anybody who would say, I can't fulfill this, I'm just going to downgrade to a D and be open 6 days.
Well, but you could, well, I don't, all right, you get the idea.
We could revoke or
That's
suspend.
what they wanted when they went to Annapolis in the late 90s, okay? That's what the Park Heights residents and us wanted.
Okay.
6 days unless you have a place to sit down and serve food.
Well, that's what you have. You have that. You have the Class A is a 6-day
so
package
they can
license.
can they trade in for Class A?
Yes, that was where there was
okay.
that's what in the 90s, that's what you could do. You could trade down those to an A and you could downgrade down to the A's. That's what an A is. An A is a packaged goods store that strictly sells packaged 6 days a week.
So
we don't
can you
have any
make them
7-day
do
packaged
that?
goods. Can we make, yes, you could downgrade your license into a
Okay.
6-day. You can't make them. Oh, we cannot make them. No, they could volunteer to do it, but can't make them do that. They had that period of time to do that.
So to be continued.
Yes.
One minor clarification on the downgrade. If they were a tavern that's in a residential zone and a non-conforming tavern, they would not have the option of switching to a liquor store because the land use is not permitted. And that's as it is today.
Okay.
Okay, just want to make sure that's clear.
There's too many, I mean, okay. Heller, you want to?
I have an answer for Councilman Henry if he wants it. Basically, there are, in 231 that you pointed out, sort of additional, the whole title is additional use standards. So anywhere in the city under this new code, if you were a tavern or a retail good establishment, you'd have these new requirements. So like you pointed out, the retail good establishment will now have to be 300 feet from its friend, right? And, but it only will practically end up coming into effect for a new one, because once you are a retail good establishment, this code goes into effect. If you're 300 feet, if you're less than 300 feet away from a neighbor, you are then by Title 18 a non-conforming use. However, in 18202, it says you're allowed to continue as long as, right. So practically the 300 feet only ends up working to be a restriction on new stores that come into play. But you still can't be non-conforming if you don't meet the rest of Title 18, which is then you're in a residential area and you're a packaged goods store, then you can't just continue forever.
Right, but if you're in a commercial, if you're commercially zoned,
then you fall under 18202. So in any way that you were non-conforming, if you were non-conforming because you're 300 feet, or you're non-conforming because this new code says, you know, your yard's not the right size, or well, that would be not a non-conforming use. But for any reason you are now magically non-conforming because we just changed the rules out from under you, you're non-conforming. And so that, yes, you could technically call them non-conforming liquor stores, but nothing happens to them for that non-conformity, you know, unless there's some issue with Title 18.
So, okay, the reason I ask is I just wanted to make it clear that if, for example, elsewhere in the code, just to pick an issue that I know is dear to my colleague's heart, if we put elsewhere in the code something like, if you are a non-conforming retail good establishment, you may not have any signage in your window. That's who this would affect. Just those stores or those retail establishments that are within 300 feet of each other.
Well, you would have to say if that's the reason you're non-conforming. I mean, you could become non-conforming in your lot size, building size, or your use, and if you become non-conforming because you are 300 feet next to someone. I mean, they could become a non-conforming use for a different reason.
Ah, I got you. So we would still have to spell that out.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Mr. Chair, one more thing. There's a typo, and I think it was our friends from the Liquor Board that pointed it out in the final section on page 324, line 27. There's a couple, actually, Mindus found a couple of typos that we'll submit to the council, so those could be corrected.
On which page?
It's 324 and 325. Like, for example, it says, except as provided in subsection B, or C, there's no subsection C. So it must mean B. So they're just some typos, Mr. Chair. I wanted to put that on the record.
Okay. We're going past the 2 hour. We start at 10 after 5. So, Councilwoman Middleton, go ahead.
I first, before I ask a question, I do want to acknowledge that I have been to a few of the Liquor Board hearings. Since we are being recorded, I want to say this statement. I have been to a few of the Liquor Board hearings with the new team, and I have definitely seen some improvement and changes, and I'm just grateful for that. So thank you again. I know it's a lot of work that has to be done, and you seem to be up to the task, so I appreciate that. And my question, as far as non-complying and violations, is there communication with other agencies? Because there are some taverns and bars that also handle food, and liquor stores that handle food. And we've also, in that tour, we noticed someone, you know, handling food with their bare hands. And we've noticed some of these places that are not ADA compliant. So,
Yeah, well,
okay.
Let her finish what she's got.
So if there is some type of ongoing or beginning of a relationship, these, you know, the health department really needs to be involved with, especially the taverns.
Yeah, certainly. So the health department.
Introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Shannon Mace. I'm Director of Policy and Planning at the Health Department. So the Health Department would inspect not the Class A's that don't sell food, but the BD7s that do have on-site consumption. So even if they have ice or juice, that's where the Health Department is inspecting, if that makes sense in terms of enforcement.
But we're also doing, I think the one thing that we might want to, is that Michelle Bailey Hedgepeth, that we do have the social compliance task force with the police department and health department, where we go out jointly and we do some inspections. And we have been taking in both police and health inspections in regards to those kind of issues regarding ICE, or when they're, we got two reports this week in regards to issues like that.
So those, and that information, I guess, will be added to,
They're
say-
part of our violations.
Oh, great, okay.
So to piggyback on Councilwoman Middleton, these establishments have a file. So whether it's A or BD7, if they're in health violations, do those violations, are they transferred over to the liquor board? So when you look at the file, it's not just a file saying that they were cited because of serving under 21 minors or gambling. They'll also have incorporated in the file health codes or building codes.
Yes, sir, but as the representative from the health department said, the A's are no longer have the health inspections because they're just packaged goods, but the BD7s and our Bs, which are our restaurant licenses, do have health inspections, and yes, that information is also entered into their file. And we also have done violations in regards to those issues.
Okay, so, no, thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, Councilman Henry?
I have another non-conforming question. So, sorry. Because if I have a tavern or a retail goods establishment that has alcohol sales, but it is currently commercially zoned, and that commercial zoning were to change to be residential, they would then become non-conforming, and they would then, under the current incarnation of this, they would then be phased out as with the others. Okay. Okay, just wanted to make sure that was true. In 3 years instead of 2. Okay, all right, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Laurie, I just want to make sure before we conclude, is that can you get, you're going to take that 108 list?
Yeah, we should be able to do that fairly quickly. I know we have a fairly recent spreadsheet from the Liquor Board, and we've been working with them on a mapping application anyway. So we just need to overlay it with the new zoning and catch those. But I anecdotally, I know the number's down, but it should give me a week or so, and I'll get you a better number.
All right. So that was page 324, 325, and 326 on taverns and packaged goods. Anyone else have any amendments, questions, discussion? No? Okay, where's my sheet? Is it?
Nope.
We are going to go back, are we?
Has somebody got a?
No.
Oh, no? Okay, you point, okay. Yes, you're gonna send us that information to the committee?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you all for attending tonight's Land Use and Transportation Committee work session. Make sure you check around, make sure whatever you brought you take back with you, because they will be closing the room shortly. And our next work session on City Council Bill 12-0152, Transform Baltimore Zoning. It's March the 18th at 5 p.m., and that will be Title 19, the last title of the text. So thank everyone for attending.